Welcome to Commonwealth Politics. My name is Mark Kemper.
And I'm Kevin Donnelly.
Today's show is on civic education in K through 12 and even university education. It's an important topic, I would argue, given the current political environment, which is very divisive. America is really polarized on all kinds of issues and partisan affairs and ideologically. It's really sort of descended in many respects into sort of a tribal warfare in many ways in American politics today. And so we think it's important to talk a little bit about what role civic education and K through 12 education might play in terms of providing a broader understanding about the American political system and American political values, and how individuals might get engaged in a productive way in the political process, both at the local, national, and local, state, and national, and even international level for that matter. On today's show, we're very happy to have two distinguished guests that both are involved in civic education. There's currently legislation in the Massachusetts State Legislature which will bring some additional civic education requirements to the K through 12 educational system that both of our guests can talk about, but just more broadly about the importance of civic education and also some of the pros and cons, some of the concerns that this might raise with regard to schools and the like. So without me continuing on talking, I'd like to just introduce our guests. One of our panelists is Ariel Jennings. She is works for a nonprofit in the state of Massachusetts. You've been with Generation Citizen for several years now,
Yep,
correct?
4.
Okay, and Generation Citizen is heavily involved in civic education and sort of experiential learning opportunities for students and young people today. And our other guest is a member of the House of Representatives in the state of Massachusetts, Representative Alice Peisch, who we're also very happy. You can talk maybe more about some of the intricacies regarding the bill currently going on now, right, I guess, as we speak. So I'd like to open it up and let Kevin ask the first question to get the discussion started.
Sure. So I'll build on what you were leading toward, Mark. The bill that we're talking about now is an act to promote and enhance civic engagement. So I was wondering if you could, just to sort of set up the conversation for our viewers, give us some background. Where did this legislation come from? What was the impetus behind it? What were some of the deficiencies that were noted in civic engagement that led to this bill even being considered in the first place? So maybe if I could direct it first to Representative Peisch, if you could speak about maybe the political angle, and then next, Ariel, if you could speak about from the perspective of the citizen-led effort among Generation Citizen, where your group has contributed to the evolution of this bill.
Sure. So there has been filed for several sessions legislation designed to improve civics education in Massachusetts. Each session, I've been chairing the Education Committee on the House side now for 8 years, and each session we get somewhere around the order of 300 bills. We don't have the time or the capacity to really analyze every one, so different bills, depending upon the issues of the time, take priority. So I would say in this past session, for a variety of reasons, this bill sort of rose to the top of the list. A combination of advocacy from groups like Ariel's, as well as very strong advocacy on the part of the Senate sponsor of the bill, Senator Harriet Chandler of Worcester, who has been pushing this for some time. And to reflect on, also a reflection of what was already said, I think there's been increasing concern in the general public that the tone of our civic discourse is such that we need to improve upon it. And so, as is often the case, people look to the schools to address a problem. I think it's important to underscore the fact that Massachusetts has always required American history and civics be taught in our public schools. This is I think this is something that was not totally understood, but it's actually one of the few things, believe it or not, the state does not require that you take English or that you take math, although there are a variety of incentives that result in everyone taking those subjects. But American history, civics are among those rare subjects that we have always required. The concern, I believe, and Ariel can correct me if she has a different perspective on this, is that while it's been required, there's been quite a range in terms of how the implementation of that requirement, because the requirement was not specific as to, what does it have to be a semester course? Does it have to be every year? Could you just mention it once? So you have across districts, which are all independently run, quite a range of activity. Some places have always had very robust courses in history and civics, and others, the concern was maybe not so much, and I think there was particular concern about districts that do not have a lot of resources and being unable to offer a really robust civics program. So there were what I would describe as two parallel efforts that were going on at the same time. Coincidentally, the Department of Education was reviewing the American history, social studies, what are called frameworks, which are essentially standards that they promulgate as guidelines for school districts in every subject. And they periodically review the various subjects. And it just so happened that in the past 2 years, this was the time they were looking at history and civics. And they actually came out with, and the board approved this past June, very robust civics standards requiring or recommending strong project-based civics in particularly the 8th grade, but also in high school, and having some components in every grade. The legislation that the legislature actually has passed in July, I believe, built on that and really provided some supports for implementing the standards. Without those standards, I don't think the legislation would be as strong as it is. And so I think the two work in tandem. The legislation requires that districts offer a project-based civics for all students in the 8th grade. Research shows that middle school is the time that students are most likely to become engaged in something like civics and government, and if you wait too long, you might miss that opportunity. And then again, must be offered also in high school. And the legislation also provides for a trust fund to be established, to be funded by both private donations as well as appropriations from state funds to support professional development for teachers, as well as something that's provided for in the bill, which is a civics challenge to sort of establish some competition among particularly 8th grade students on a statewide level. And then there are a few other components of the bill that are sort of on the administrative side, reporting requirements and so on. The bill went to the governor at the end of July. He returned it with suggested amendments. We have been reviewing those amendments for the past several weeks, and the House and the Senate basically agreed with the primary amendment, which was to add language to ensure that the projects are all nonpartisan. I think to the point about polarization, the last thing we want to do is have students engaged in activities that heighten the polarization as opposed to reducing it. So I anticipate that bill maybe going through the Senate as we speak. Both the House and the Senate are in what are called informal sessions today. And I am hopeful that I will be getting a text saying it has gone through at least one, if not both chambers today, and then we'll go to the governor for his signature. I'm cautiously optimistic that he will sign the bill. It's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but I hope it covers the points that you were asking about.
Very much so, thank you.
And just to jump in, I think one really important factor that this bill is addressing is what we call the civic engagement gap. And that is that research shows, if everyone, all the viewers or those in your audience could reflect on their civic education. Some do not have it, and some do. And often when those that do have it, it's incredibly rote. It's about civic knowledge, fact-based, memorizing information, the 3 branches of government. And then when we dissect the data of who gets that, even that version of civic education, we see that there's a gap in terms of low income and students of color not having access and receiving that. So So one of the most exciting parts of this bill is the Civics Trust Fund, which would be established, which could go to resource the schools in particular that are experiencing this gap. And we can really see all young people, not just a select few, have access to this type of experiential civic education that teaches not only knowledge but skills. So that's one of the more exciting things for me about the bill and in tandem with the standards being rolled out.
So in terms of, so if we were to sort of disentangle these two streams, the one is the in-class, here's what you need to know about the American political system. Right now, that's not being done well across the state from what based on what I'm hearing here. But there are standards now in place. Now, are those standards, will there be are these going to be tested on MCAS? Where that hasn't happened yet, though.
It has not happened yet, but the Department of Education is in the process of establishing an assessment for for social studies, which will include a civics component. And it's my understanding that they are reviewing quite a range in terms of what type of assessment they ultimately approve or recommend to the board for approval. I'm assuming that most, if not all of you, went to Massachusetts public high schools. So you're familiar with the MCAS tests that you took in the 10th grade for math, ELA, and science. This will be very different. I think that they are considering the possibility of having some sort of a project meet the requirement and having some kind of assessment. They have not yet made any kind of a decision. My understanding is that they're really looking at all kinds of assessments and looking for input. So while there will be something, I think it's not going to be, it's unlikely that it will be the kind of thing that Massachusetts students are used to.
So it wouldn't be just a multiple choice exam, what I'm hearing in terms of this?
Unlikely.
Okay. And
It's very exciting. I think one thing that's interesting about assessment is that where there is an assessment, resources go. So we've seen math and ELA be really funded from teacher professional development and all sorts of infrastructure because there is a test. So, many of us might think, oh, we can't put our students through another test, but if it is this alternative test, which we really hope is what happens, there is a great benefit for accountability and also resources flowing back to social studies and history and those subjects, including civics.
So I'd just like to add a little footnote. I think there's no question that there may be some places where the curriculum has narrowed and there's a tremendous focus on those subjects that are tested via the state assessment. But I want to be very clear that that is not uniform across the board, and in many, many districts, we still do have very robust curriculum in all areas, regardless of whether it is subject to the test. The real focus of these new standards and the statute is to ensure that all schools all students have access to this quality of education.
So I have another more policy-oriented question. Speaking again about the Civics Project Trust Fund and those resources that are being compiled. So am I right in understanding that that will be a compilation of both public and private funding? And then maybe if you could just give everyone a better understanding of how those resources will be allocated, and to what degree are there assurances that those dollars are going to go to those who are?
I help lead the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition, where about 20 organizations, including the JFK Library, iCivics, have come together to advocate for the bill and the trust fund. The vision for the trust fund is to not only have state money put into it in the amount of $1.5 million we're advocating for, but also for private foundations in the state to be able to contribute to it. We've seen this work very well in Illinois, so we're actually modeling this after another state that's done this same thing. And we have foundations that are interested in putting dollars into civic education. A benefit to having this separate trust is that it's really protected to support civic education. It doesn't, get muddled year after year into other priorities of education, of which there are many that are important. So that's the vision. We, however, if the money is appropriated, don't have the total control or any control over how it's then distributed. What our coalition will advocate for is that at least 50% or more of that money goes to low-income districts as defined by how the Department of Education can develop a definition around that. So we're going to advocate for them to be distributed in that way, and they likely will be.
Thank you.
How have the schools, what's the response been from a lot of the schools that you've talked with or encountered in terms of, that how are we going to find projects for students to work on to satisfy this requirement? And who's going to be doing that? Is this going to be teachers doing it within the context of the classroom? Is it, a lot of these activities I'm assuming would have to take place outside of school hours, or is that not the case? Or
no, not necessarily.
Okay.
So I can give some examples of Generation Citizen. We work with many districts in huge district-wide partnerships. We work in Lowell across their entire high school of every student and all of their 8 middle schools. Malden, we're starting to work in Fall River and Boston, in what we call gateway cities in Massachusetts. The fun classes, so it's happening then. And instead of each student having their own project, because having 30 projects going at once is very overwhelming, the students form a consensus on a single issue and push forward a project together. So they might say that gun violence is an issue in their community, and their project might be partnering with the chief of police to run a gun buyback program. Or something as simple as there's a park nearby that it's not safe, so they would advocate for more police monitoring and more trash cans. So we need to really push forward a single issue, which from a capacity standpoint from a teacher is a lot easier than.
And to underscore that the requirements are for within the regular school day. I think that in the so if the student wasn't participating in some extracurricular activity, they were not getting the benefit of this. So the focus is definitely on this being part of the development. And in connection, whether did not, the department, via the implementation of the new standards, will be doing professional development as a matter of course. So this will be helping teachers figure out how to embed into their
Civics works has declined understanding of why civic engagement is sort of lagged. But for anyone who might be exposed to why to the students of Massachusetts today? That's a question to both of you. Whoever would like to take it.
Well, I think understanding how our government works is critical for all citizens, is critical for the government working. Our Massachusetts Constitution, upon which the United States Constitution is then, the government actually does not work. I believe much more interested in government. I do not pay that much attention and about it. And I'm a little bit different from this impact, particularly when the federal delegation from Massachusetts, a question about what caused the disengagement in the connection. So I think it really is incumbent upon our school system to make that connection. As I said, things that they're not happy with, but I think it's just sort of human nature that if things are going along smoothly, you tend to maybe not pay that much attention, and suddenly when things are not the way you would like, you get a little bit more engagement. We actually saw that for the primaries in September, where we had not an awful lot of statewide contests that were getting a lot of attention. We had huge increase in turnout. So I think in Boston, more people turned out for the Democratic primary this year than turned out for the mayor's election last year. So that to me is quite a good thing, and I'm hoping that we can build on that new sense of interest and engagement by giving our students more tools so they understand how.
There's an incredible desire and passion of the millennial generation and the upcoming generation to make change in their communities. The incidence of volunteerism quite high, and I think there's something around feeling a lack of knowledge or a hopelessness around the political system. It's really hard to figure out, and there's a lot of basic knowledge that one has to have. Whereas, volunteering is something that young people are exposed to a lot more level, in particular when they're young, where they can really meet with their mayor, really have their state rep in to make a presence. It's going to be the powerful moment or moments where they can start saying, oh, I can influence my community through politics as well.
I'm wondering how this is going to play out when this actually is implemented, right? Because I know a fair number of people that program. I don't want to participate in that because I actually want to promote guns. So will there be rather than do that, I want to have this program on anti-abortion, right? Or pick your issue that might be very divisive. Will they have the freedom to do that, or how's that going to work?
Yes, they will. I want first, hopefully that won't happen, because in the process of consensus building, that class wouldn't choose to move forward with that issue and work on it if there were people in the class that didn't want to. So ideally, they would choose a different issue and work on it together. But there is going to be a portion of the bill, hopefully with some amendments being worked out right now, around that there will be another opportunity that they can do a different project in their community. So that will 100% be an option. But the ideal with teacher professional development is that the decision is student-centered. So the teacher cannot, first of all, tell the students what to work on, which is important, and then that the students have to all agree to move forward.
So I think you raise a very interesting point, but I would like to underscore something that hopefully the students will learn in this, which is contrary to what I think the general perception is in the public. The overwhelming majority of issues that governments deal with are not, they're not partisan, they are not ideologically driven. They are things like, how do we get the park cleaned up? How do we make sure that the pothole that's ruining my car on my street is fixed? These, if you look at your local governments, that is what you're going to see most of their time devoted to. In the state legislature, when you look at our votes, the overwhelming number of votes in the state legislature are unanimous. They are not along partisan lines. The ones that get the attention and that the media might focus on are those situations where you do have some ideologically driven issues. So I think that the overwhelming majority of issues that come up in these projects are very likely to not fall into the kinds of categories that you are raising. And just to be on the safe side, the amendments that the governor has proposed, that the bill that is currently sitting in the Senate adopted, requires that they be nonpartisan, and there is a specific provision that says if a student does not want to participate in whatever has been chosen, that another option must be given, and there's a process by which that occurs. So I think this will address those concerns.
And that will have to be the final comment. So we encourage our viewers to learn more about the legislation that may already be enacted and be sent off to the governor when it is implemented at the local school level, and get involved in the community to try to promote civic education, regardless of what your partisan views are, regardless of what your ideological views are. I think it's good to have citizens that are talking with one another, that do have knowledge about basic foundational principles of American politics, and even though those can be contestable, it's still good to have these discussions in a civil way. So I want to thank our guests for being here today, and thanks Kevin for participating on the show, and we'll see you next time on Commonwealth Politics.